Welcome to the deep dive. And today we're going to tackle a question that I bet keeps you up at night sometimes. Am I going to make it?
Oh, yeah,
We all think about it.
definitely.
Today we're going to dive into the world of time itself to see if we can't get a handle on that very question. We're going to use two sources, a philosophical talk by Vernon Howard and the Wikipedia entry for time,
Right.
to explore how our understanding of time impacts our sense of self, our fears, and ultimately our path to living a more fulfilling life.
It's a tall order,
Ah,
but I think we can do it.
I think so too.
Um, so Vernon Howard, this guy's really interesting because he starts by acknowledging this pervasive anxiety around making it.
Right.
He argues that it's rooted in a false sense of self, a self that's been constructed from our past experiences, our memories, and all those societal expectations we've absorbed. It's almost as if we're carrying around this heavy baggage and mistaking it for who we truly are.
So it's not really about achieving something external then, is it? It's more about how we perceive ourselves.
Exactly. He calls this the time self. This illusion of continuity we create by clinging to the past and projecting it onto the future.
Yeah.
Think back to when you were a kid. Maybe you struggle with a simple math problem while everyone else seemed to get it.
Yeah.
That feeling of being behind or inadequate
Yeah.
can stick with us, shaping how we view our potential and ultimately our future.
Oh, I totally get that. I remember being terrified of giving presentations in school because one time I completely blanked. And it took me years to shake that feeling of dread every time I had to speak in public.
That's a perfect example of these early experiences. They create a blueprint for how we approach challenges, how we measure ourselves against others, and how we envision our future selves.
So how do we break free from this time self and all the anxieties that come with it?
Well, Howard poses a radical question. What if you had no tomorrow at all? Now, he's not advocating for reckless bandaning here. It's more of a thought experiment to shake us free from clinging to a specific outcome, a rigid picture of what we think our future should be.
So it's kind of like he's saying, let go of the reins a bit. Be open to those unexpected turns in the road.
Precisely. He gives this great example. If you fire me, I'll sell firewood to get 50 cents to buy bread.
Wow.
It's about detaching from a fixed vision of success, from the need to control every aspect of the future, and instead cultivating a willingness to adapt, to find creative solutions no matter what challenges arise.
Yeah, I can see how that connects to the fear of not making it. We get so fixated on a particular path or particular outcome that we create all this pressure for ourselves, all this anxiety.
Right, and that anxiety often drives us to seek validation from external sources. Howard talks about this huddling phenomenon, people flocking to social gatherings,
Yeah.
joining clubs, even desperately seeking validation on social media, all in an attempt to convince themselves that those fleeting smiles and compliments are real and lasting.
But it's never enough, is it? There's always another achievement to chase, another milestone to hit, another like to collect.
It's a vicious cycle, fueled by a fragile ego, a self that's constantly seeking external validation because it lacks inner security.
So how do we escape this trap of seeking external validation?
Well, Howard suggests that we need to start paying attention to the bumps and bruises we receive throughout the day, both literally and metaphorically. He tells this funny anecdote about a husband
Okay.
who keeps coming home with unexplained bruises. His wife finally gets him to admit that he gets these bumps and bruises because he's so distracted while driving,
Wow.
daydreaming about bears or pretty girls,
Yeah.
instead of paying attention to the road.
That's a hilarious image, but I think I see what he's getting at. It's like we're so caught up in our thoughts, our worries, our distractions that we're blind to the present moment and how our own actions might be contributing to our problems.
That's exactly it. Howard argues that we often fail to see our own role in attracting negative experiences. Because we're so preoccupied with these distractions, he calls this the law of accident.
Okay.
This idea that our unconscious actions and thoughts can actually draw negative experiences into our lives.
Wait, so you're saying that if I'm constantly worrying about something bad happening, I'm actually increasing the likelihood of it happening?
It's not about blame or magical thinking. It's about recognizing that our inner state, our thoughts, beliefs, and expectations create a kind of magnetic field
Uh-huh.
that attracts certain experiences. If we're fixated on negativity, fear, or lack, we're more likely to attract situations that confirm those beliefs.
That's kind of a scary thought. But it also feels empowering in a way. If I can change my internal state, can I change the kinds of experiences I attract?
That's the core of Howard's message.
Uh-huh.
He believes we have the power to break free from this cycle of attracting negativity, but it requires a radical shift in our perspective and our behavior. He calls this conscious defiance.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly is conscious defiance, and how do we practice it?
Well, it's about directly confronting the riflemen that are holding us captive in our own minds.
The rifleman.
Yeah, you know those fears, limiting beliefs, and negative thought patterns. They keep us from living authentically. Howard uses this powerful image of charging uphill against 1,000 riflemen.
1,000.
Yeah. He says that if we have any light within us, we won't tolerate being shot at by these riflemen. We won't settle for a life dictated by fear and self-doubt.
So it's about standing up for ourselves, asserting our right to live a life free from these internal limitations.
Exactly. But it's not about aggression or fighting back.
Okay.
It's about facing our fears head-on with courage and determination, but also with a sense of calm and clarity.
That sounds incredibly challenging. How do we cultivate that kind of courage, especially when those riflemen seem so formidable?
Well, it starts with small acts of defiance. Instead of automatically agreeing with someone out of habit or fear, we pause and ask ourselves, do I really agree with this?
Right.
Or am I just trying to please someone? Avoid conflict
Well,
or maintain a certain image.
it's about becoming aware of those moments when we're giving our power away.
Yes, and choosing to do something different. It could be something as simple as admitting when you don't know something.
Yeah.
Instead of pretending. Or speaking up when you feel unheard, even if your voice shakes a little.
This is starting to make sense. It's like we're chipping away at the armor of those riflemen, weakening their hold on us, one small act of defiance at a time.
Exactly. And as we become more confident in our ability to face these internal riflemen, something amazing happens. Howard says those riflemen start to tremble, their guns clatter to the ground, because they recognize that we're no longer buying into their illusions.
Wow, that's a powerful image. It's like those fears and limiting beliefs lose their power when we refuse to be intimidated by them.
That's the essence of conscious defiance. It's about reclaiming our power, not by fighting against the darkness, but by shining our inner light so brightly that the darkness simply cannot exist in its presence.
It's really interesting how he connects this idea of conscious defiance to our relationships with others. He says that if we have any light in us, we won't tolerate being mistreated or disrespected in our relationships.
That's a really important point. He's not advocating for, aggression or retaliation.
Right.
It's more about setting healthy boundaries
Yeah.
and asserting our own worth. Not from a place of ego, but from a place of self-respect, knowing our own value.
Yeah, I can see how that could be challenging, especially if you've been conditioned to please others or avoid conflict.
Absolutely. It requires courage to stand up for ourselves, especially when we're dealing with someone who might be used to having their way, or who might react negatively to our newfound assertiveness.
Right.
But Howard believes that as we start to act from a place of authentic strength, we'll often see a shift in the other person as well.
Oh, interesting. So it's like those riflemen, those negative aspects of the other person that are trying to control or manipulate us, start to back down when they realize we're not playing their game anymore.
Exactly. But refusing to be controlled by standing in our own truth, we create a space for something new to emerge, both within ourselves and in the relationship.
This brings us to a point that has me kind of curious. How does all of this connect to the concept of time? As described in the Wikipedia entry, we've been talking about internal experiences, but time seems like this vast external force that governs everything.
That's a great question. It's tempting to think of time as this objective external force that's beyond our control.
Right.
But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if our perception of time, the way we experience it, is actually shaped by our internal state, by those very fears and limiting beliefs we've been talking about?
Are you suggesting that we might have more influence over our experience of time than we realize?
Precisely. Think about how often we use time as a weapon against ourselves. We dwell on the past, regretting things we've done, or things that have happened to us. We worry about the future, fearing what might happen. And in doing so, we miss out on the only time we truly have any control over the present moment.
Yeah. It's like we're constantly at war with time, trying to escape it, control it, manipulate it, but ultimately becoming its prisoner.
That's a powerful image. And that struggle creates so much suffering, so much anxiety.
It does.
Howard's teachings offer a way out of that trap. He's saying that by becoming conscious of our relationship with time, by learning to live in the present moment more fully, we can break free from the tyranny of the past and the fear of the future.
I'm starting to see how this all ties together, but it seems easier said than done.
Sure.
How do we actually shift our focus to the present moment? How do we stop those thoughts from dragging us back into the past or launching us into anxieties about the future?
It's a practice, a continual process of becoming aware of our thoughts and gently redirecting our attention back to the present moment.
Yeah.
Howard suggests starting with small steps, like simply slowing down.
Oh, okay.
Our fast-paced culture keeps us in a constant state of distraction,
Yeah.
preventing us from truly seeing what's happening in our lives.
Yeah, it's like we're always rushing to the next thing,
Yeah.
never fully present in the moment we're actually in.
Exactly. He uses a simple example that I think we can all relate to, spilling coffee,
Oh, yeah.
because we're rushing
Mm-hmm.
and then getting irritated and blaming it on, external factors.
Right.
It's a perfect illustration of how our unconscious habits
Mm-hmm.
and reactions create the very problems we complain about.
So the antidote is to slow down, pay attention, become more mindful of our actions and their consequences.
Precisely. It doesn't have to be some big formal meditation practice.
Right.
It can be as simple as paying attention to our breath for a few minutes,
Mm.
or noticing the sensations of our feet on the ground as we walk,
Yeah.
or even just consciously savoring a cup of coffee
Yeah.
instead of gulping it down on the way to the next thing.
I like that. These are all things we can actually incorporate into our daily lives. It's not about becoming some kind of Zen master.
Right.
It's about finding those small moments to reconnect with the present moment.
And as we cultivate this awareness, we start to notice those habitual thought patterns that keep us trapped in fear and self-doubt. Instead of being swept away by them, we can simply observe them, acknowledge them, and then gently choose to redirect our attention to something more positive and life-affirming.
This is starting to sound a lot like that conscious defiance we were talking about earlier. We're defying those riflemen in our minds by refusing to let them dictate our experience of the present moment.
You got it. It's all connected. By practicing conscious defiance, we challenge those fears and limiting beliefs that keep us trapped in a cycle of negativity and self-doubt. And by cultivating present moment awareness, we weaken the grip of those thoughts and create a space for a more peaceful and fulfilling experience of life to emerge.
Okay, this is all making a lot of sense, but I have to admit there's a part of me that's still skeptical. Is it really possible to change our experience of time so profoundly? Can we really escape the anxieties of the past and the fears of the future just by shifting our focus to the present moment?
That skepticism is natural. It's easy to get caught up in the illusion that time is this fixed external reality that we're powerless to change.
Right.
But remember what we were talking about earlier, the concept of the time self. That sense of self that's constructed from our past experiences and future projections is what keeps us trapped in this limited perception of time.
So are you saying that if we can dismantle this time self, we can experience time differently?
That's exactly what Howard is suggesting. It's not about denying the past or ignoring the future. It's about recognizing that our experience of time is ultimately a reflection of our internal state.
This is starting to feel like we're venturing into some pretty deep philosophical territory.
We are. But the beauty of it is that these profound philosophical ideas can have very practical applications in our daily lives.
So how do we start to dismantle this time self and access this more expansive experience of time? I'm ready to hear some practical tips.
It starts with understanding the ways in which we unconsciously reinforce this time self through our thoughts and behaviors. One common way is through comparison.
Okay.
We constantly compare ourselves to others,
Yeah.
their achievements, their possessions, their relationships, and we use these comparisons to judge ourselves and determine our own worth.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of that. Social media is a breeding ground for comparison. I constantly find myself scrolling through perfectly curated feeds, feeling inadequate and envious. It's a never-ending cycle.
That's a perfect example. Social media, with its relentless focus on highlights and achievements, can easily fuel the time self by reinforcing the illusion that our worth is determined by external factors.
So how do we break free from this comparison trap?
Howard suggests that we start by becoming aware of those moments when we're caught in the comparison game. Notice those thoughts that arise. I wish I had that. I'm not as successful as they are. I'll never be good enough. Simply observe those thoughts without judgment and recognize that they're just thoughts, not the ultimate truth of who you are.
It sounds like we're talking about mindfulness again. That seems to be a recurring theme in Howard's teachings.
It is. Mindfulness is at the heart of his approach. By cultivating present moment awareness, we can start to detach from those thoughts and emotions They keep us entangled in the past and the future.
So it's not about suppressing those thoughts or pretending they don't exist. It's about recognizing them for what they are, passing mental phenomena, and choosing not to get swept away by them.
You've got it. And as we become more adept at observing our thoughts and emotions, we can start to make conscious choices about how we want to experience the present moment. Instead of letting our minds dictate our experience, we can choose to focus on what we're grateful for, what brings us joy, what aligns with our values.
I'm starting to see how this shift in perspective can lead to a more expansive experience of time. By releasing the grip of those fears and anxieties, we free ourselves to be more fully present in each moment.
That's the essence of it. When we're no longer consumed by thoughts of the past or worries about the future, we open ourselves up to the infinite possibilities of the present moment.
This is all incredibly insightful, but I have to admit my mind is starting to feel a bit overloaded. We've covered so much ground in this conversation, and I'm eager to hear more about the practical steps we can take to integrate these ideas into our daily lives.
I understand. We've been exploring some profound concepts, and it's important to give ourselves time to digest and process them.
Okay, let's take a moment to absorb all of this wisdom before we dive into the practical applications. We'll be right back after a short break to explore some concrete ways to bring these concepts to life in our everyday experience of time. Stay tuned.
Okay, we're back, and we've been talking about these ideas from Vernon Howard on time and fear, and I'm really curious to see if there's anything we can do to actually shift our experience of time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, one of the most powerful practices that Howard emphasizes is cultivating present moment awareness.
It might sound simple, but in our fast-paced, hyper-stimulated world, it's actually a radical act.
I can totally see how that ties back to the idea of the time self that we were talking about. If we're
Yeah.
constantly, dwelling on the past or worrying about the future, we're essentially feeding that illusion of a self that's tracked in time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that creates all sorts of problems for us. Anxiety, stress, a sense of disconnection from ourselves and the world around us.
Right.
Yeah.
So by focusing on the present moment, are we essentially weakening the grip of that time self and creating space for a more, authentic experience of ourselves?
You got it. Howard suggests a variety of practices to cultivate present moment awareness. One that he emphasizes is simply slowing down. Notice those moments when you're rushing through your day feeling stressed and overwhelmed. Consciously choose to pause, take a few deep breaths, and bring your attention to your senses. What do you see, hear, smell, taste, and feel in this moment?
It's like you're hitting the reset button on your nervous system. Instead of being swept away by the momentum of our thoughts and to-dos and everything, we're creating a space to just be present with ourselves and our surroundings.
Exactly. And that space of presence is incredibly powerful. It allows us to step out of that reactive mode and make more conscious choices about how we want to respond to the situation.
That reminds me of Howard's story about the husband who kept getting bumps and bruises because he was so distracted while driving. It's like we're all prone to these kinds of accidents when we're not fully present in the moment.
That's a great connection. Howard calls this the law of accident. The idea that our unconscious thoughts and actions can actually attract negative experiences into our lives. And it's not about blame or guilt. It's about recognizing that our inner state has a powerful influence on our outer reality.
So if I'm constantly worried about making mistakes or, encountering obstacles, I'm actually increasing the likelihood of those things happening.
It's not as simple as cause and effect, but there's definitely a correlation. When we're consumed by fear and negativity, we tend to focus on what we don't want, which can create a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, wow. So how do we shift out of that pattern? How do we start attracting more of what we do want in our lives?
Howard suggests that we need to be willing to charge uphill against 1,000 riflemen.
Oh, yeah, those riflemen.
Yeah. It's a metaphor for confronting our deepest fears and limiting beliefs with courage and determination.
But earlier you were saying that conscious defiance isn't about aggression or fighting back. So how do we reconcile those two ideas?
It's about finding that sweet spot between assertive action and inner peace. It's about standing firmly in our truth, not from a place of ego or defensiveness, but from a place of deep self-knowing and acceptance.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like in a real-life situation?
Sure. Let's say you're in a meeting at work, and someone presents an idea that you strongly disagree with. In the past, you might have stayed silent out of fear of rocking the boat or being judged. But with conscious defiance, you would speak up clearly and respectfully, expressing your perspective, even if it means challenging the status quo.
That takes courage, especially if you're in a work environment where dissenting opinions are not always welcome.
Absolutely. It's about pushing past those comfort zones and stepping into our authentic power. And it's not just about big, dramatic acts of defiance. It can also show up in small, everyday choices,
Like what?
like choosing to say no to a commitment. That you don't have the time or energy for,
Yeah.
even if it means disappointing someone, or setting boundaries in a relationship where you've been feeling taken advantage of, or simply speaking up for yourself when someone says something that you find hurtful or offensive.
So it's about aligning our actions with our values, even when it's uncomfortable or challenging.
Exactly. And that alignment creates a sense of inner integrity that is incredibly empowering. It's like we're no longer at war with ourselves, trying to fit into a mold that doesn't feel authentic.
I like this. This is starting to feel very liberating. But how does this connect back to the broader concept of time, that we were talking about earlier?
When we're living in alignment with our values, we're naturally more present in each moment. We're not wasting our energy dwelling on regrets from the past or worrying about uncertainties of the future. We're fully engaged in the here and now, which allows us to experience a sense of flow and ease that transcends the limitations of the time-bound self.
It's like we're tapping into a more expansive dimension of time, one that's not linear or sequential, but rather a field of infinite possibility.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Eh.
And that's where the true magic of this work lies. By confronting our fears, cultivating present moment awareness, and living in alignment with our values, we open ourselves up to a reality that transcends the constraints of the time-bound self
Mm.
and allows us to experience the fullness of our being in each and every moment.
Wow. This has been such an insightful exploration. We've covered a lot of ground, from the anxieties of making it to the power of conscious defiance, and ultimately to the liberating potential of shifting our relationship with time itself. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools to work with.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you. Remember, this is a journey, not a destination. Be gentle with yourself, practice consistently, and trust that you have the power to create a more fulfilling and expansive experience of time, both within yourself and in the world around you.
That's a great point. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into time, and we'll see you next time for another exploration into the world of knowledge and insight.